The room was full of men who believed they were untouchable. 8 of them, seated around a table that cost more than most people's yearly salary. Crystal glasses, private label wine, the kind of silence between sentences that powerful men use to remind each other of the exact distance between them. This was Gilt, Seoul's most exclusive private dining room. You did not get a reservation here. You got an invitation. And invitations only came from one kind of person. Zara had served rooms like this for 3 years. She knew how to move through them, how to pour without making eye contact, how to disappear while standing 3 feet away. She had turned invisibility into a skill, and that skill had kept her safe. Until tonight. Nobody at that table was looking at her. That was exactly how she needed it. She had circled the table twice, refilled 3 glasses, noted the dynamic the way she always did, who deferred, who dominated, who was pretending to be comfortable when they weren't. It was the same architecture of power she had studied for years. She could read a room like this in under 4 minutes, and what she read tonight made the back of her neck go cold. Director Yoon was at the head of the table. Of course he was. This was his dinner, his room, his performance. He had been watching her since her second circuit of the table. Not the way men sometimes watch women in restaurants, lazy and forgettable. This was deliberate. Cataloging. The way someone looks at something they're already planning to use. She kept moving, kept pouring, kept her face empty. Then he reached out and closed his hand around her wrist. The room kept talking. Nobody stopped. Nobody looked, except one person. At the far end of the table, Han Seo set down his glass. She felt the grip tighten. She felt the words Director Yoon leaned up to say against the side of her head, quiet enough that only she could hear them, words that were not meant for a waitress, words about Han Seo, about money, about something that had been buried and was supposed to stay buried. He laughed after he said them, like it was nothing, like she was nothing. She set the wine bottle down on the table, very carefully, very slowly, and then she turned, pulled her wrist free, and slapped Director Yoon across the face with everything she had. The sound of it filled the room. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Director Yoon's head stayed turned to the side. His hand came up slowly, touched his cheek. The entire table waited. And then, from the far end, came the sound of a single chair being pushed back. Unhurried, deliberate. Han Seo stood up. He looked at Director Yoon. Then he looked at Zara. And he smiled. Not a polite smile. Not a performative one. Something real and private and completely out of place in that room. He raised one hand and touched his own cheek, mirroring Yoon's gesture with an expression that said something no one at that table could quite decode. Then he said her name. Quiet. Certain. Like he had been waiting for the right moment to say it. Zara. Before we go any further, you need to understand who Zara Addo actually was before that room. Because the slap did not come from nowhere. Nothing that matters ever does. She came to Seoul on a partial academic scholarship from the University of Ghana, linguistics and international communications. She was 24 and she believed, the way only very smart young people believe things, that the world would recognize what she was worth if she simply showed up and worked hard enough. The scholarship ran out in the second year. Administrative restructuring. A phrase that means someone somewhere decided the numbers did not add up, and the people holding the short end of that calculation were simply not consulted. She applied for extensions, filed appeals, sat in offices where people looked at her paperwork and then at her, and then back at the paperwork with expressions she had learned to read very quickly. Nothing came through. She had 2 options: go home or survive. Going home meant going back to Accra with nothing. It meant sitting across from her mother at a dinner table and explaining that the dream had not worked out. It meant watching her younger sister quietly absorb that information and adjust her own ambitions downward accordingly. She was not going to do that, so she stayed. She found work where she could find it. A tutoring center first, then a hotel front desk, then Gilt, where a manager named Ms. Park saw something in the way Zara carried herself and offered her a trial shift that turned into 3 years. 3 years. And in 3 years, she had learned that survival in a place like Gilt required a very specific kind of performance. You became whatever the room needed you to be. Invisible when invisibility served. Present when presence was required. Never the story. Always the backdrop. She was good at it. Too good, maybe. Because somewhere in those 3 years, the performance had started to feel like the only version of herself she could access anymore. The real Zara. The one who had opinions and ambitions and a voice that could fill a lecture hall, had gotten very quiet. She had not noticed how quiet until the moment she slapped director Yoon and felt, for the first time in 3 years, completely and terrifyingly herself. But that feeling lasted about 45 seconds. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Seoul prefix. She stared at it for 3 rings. Then she answered. The voice on the other end was calm and female and said 4 words that made Zara's stomach drop straight through the floor. He wants to meet. Han Seo did not become who he was by accident. Seo Capital was 12 years old. Built from a single seed investment Han Seo had extracted from a mentor who later tried to take the company back through a hostile board maneuver and failed spectacularly. That story was told in Seoul's financial circles as a cautionary tale, though who exactly it was meant to caution depended entirely on who was telling it. He was 36, unmarried, no public relationships on record, 3 failed attempts by rival firms to find leverage on him through his personal life, all of which had turned up nothing useful because there was genuinely nothing to find. He had made himself clean the way people make themselves clean when they have decided that vulnerability is a structural weakness they cannot afford. What the financial press did not know, what almost nobody knew, was why Han Seo had been at Director Yoon's dinner in the first place. It was not a social visit. It was not a business negotiation. It was surveillance. Director Yoon had been quietly acquiring shares in 3 companies that formed a specific constellation. Individually, they were unremarkable. Together, if someone connected them the right way, they formed the infrastructure for something that could damage Han Seo in a way that no boardroom maneuver could fix. Han Seo had been tracking this for 8 months. He had gone to that dinner to read Yoon's timeline, to see how close the man was to moving. What he had not anticipated was Zara. He had known her name before he walked into Gilt that first time 6 months ago. That is the part of the story that changes everything. He had known it because of a file that connected Zara Addo, linguistics graduate, waitress at Gilt, to a piece of information that Director Yoon had buried 3 years ago, the same year Zara's scholarship had been cut. The same year, the same budget office, the same signature on the termination letter. It was not a coincidence. It had never been a coincidence. And when Director Yoon grabbed Zara's wrist and whispered those words against her ear, Han Seo understood that Yoon had finally realized the same thing, which meant Zara was no longer just a witness to something dangerous. She had become the target. She did not sleep that night. She lay on her bed and stared at the ceiling and ran through every version of what had just happened, trying to find the one where the consequences were manageable. She could not find it. She had assaulted a man who controlled the flow of money through half of Seoul's hospitality industry. A man with the kind of connections that could make a work visa disappear, a landlord cooperative, a reference letter get lost. The small, quiet mechanisms of a life could be dismantled in ways that left no fingerprints. She knew this. She had seen it happen to others. She got up at 5 in the morning and walked. If you are watching this from somewhere you have ever had to fight just to stay somewhere that was not yours by birth, drop your city in the comments. Because Zara's story is not just hers. The box was waiting for her at the staff entrance. Her apron folded on top, her spare hair ties, the small photograph of her mother she kept in her locker. All of it arranged with the particular neatness of someone who wanted the message to be clean and unambiguous. The envelope underneath contained 1 month's severance and a letter that cited conduct unbecoming of the Gilt standard. No mention of Director Yoon. No mention of the wrist. No mention of what he had said. Just her, reduced to a conduct issue, dismissed with a month's rent. She stood there for a long time. Then she picked up the box. She was 2 blocks away when a black car pulled up beside her. Not aggressively, smoothly. The way expensive cars move when the person inside them is not in a hurry because they already know how this ends. The window came down. Hannah looked out at her from the passenger seat, dark bob precise, glasses catching the morning light, a tablet in her lap, her expression carrying the careful neutrality of someone delivering a message they did not write. "He would like to speak with you." Zara kept walking. "Miss Addo." A pause. "He knows about the scholarship. He knows about the letter. He knows what Yoon said to you last night." Zara stopped walking. She turned. "Who are you?" "My name is Hannah."
I work for Han Seo.
"He has been trying to protect you for 6 months. Last night made that significantly more difficult. He is asking for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. She had nothing left to lose this morning. She had a box of belongings and a month's rent, and a name that someone powerful had apparently known for 6 months without telling her. She got in the car. He was standing when she walked in. She noticed that immediately. He could have been seated, could have made her walk the length of the room to reach him. That is what people in his position usually did. The architecture of power is mostly about making other people cross distances. He was standing, waiting, his hands at his sides. "Zara." Same voice, same certainty. The way he said it bothered her more in daylight than it had in that dining room. Because in that dining room it had felt like a moment. Here it felt like a fact. "You don't get to call me that," she said. "You don't know me." Something moved through his expression. Not offense, not amusement, something quieter. "Sit down," he said. "Please." She sat, but she kept her coat on. He talked for 12 minutes without stopping. He told her about the scholarship, about the budget office that had processed her termination letter, about the name on that letter, a mid-level administrator named Cha, who had been on Director Yoon's indirect payroll for 11 years and who processed paperwork on request. He told her that 3 years ago, you had been running a money laundering structure through a network of academic and cultural exchange programs, and that Zara's scholarship fund had been one of the vehicles. When the structure needed to be compressed, the legitimate recipients got cut. She had not been unlucky. She had been deliberately removed. She opened the folder. The documents were organized, dated, cross-referenced, the kind of file that someone builds over a long time with very specific intent. Her name appeared on page 3, her scholarship application, her termination notice, a communication chain between Cha and an email address that traced back to one of Yoon's subsidiary offices. Her hands were very still on the paper. 3 years. 3 years of survival and invisibility and careful performance, and all of it had started with this. With a man she had never met deciding that her scholarship was a line item that needed to disappear. She looked up at Han Seo. "Why did you have this file?" A pause. The first one he had allowed himself since she sat down. "Because 6 months ago, I was building a case against Yoon, and your name kept appearing in places it should not have been. That does not explain why you kept coming to Gilt." Another pause. Shorter. "No," he said. "It does not. Now. Before I tell you what Yoon had said to Zara in that dining room. Before I tell you why that whisper made Han Seo stand up from his chair, I need you to tell me something. Do you think a man like Han Seo, someone who built walls around himself like architecture, someone who had spent 12 years making sure nothing could reach him, do you think a man like that comes back to the same restaurant 6 times in 6 months for a case file? Drop your honest opinion below, because it matters for what comes next." This is what Director Yoon had said. Not all of it, just the part that mattered. Just the sentence that had been compressed into a weapon and delivered against her ear like it was small talk. He had said that Han Seo's mother's medical debt, the private clinic in Busan, the treatments that had kept her alive for 18 months before she died 4 years ago, had been financed through a fund that Yoon himself had structured. and that the paperwork attached to that fund contained Han Seo's signature on documents he had never actually signed. Forged signatures on financial instruments connected to a money laundering operation. If those documents surfaced, Han Seo would not just lose his company. He would go to prison. Han Seo did not move for a very long time. Then, quietly, he asked her to repeat the exact words, exactly as Yoon had said them.
She did.
He stood up, walked to the window, stood with his back to her looking out at the city for what felt like a full minute. She watched him. There was something in the set of his shoulders that she recognized without expecting to. The architecture of someone absorbing something alone, even when there is another person in the room. She knew that posture from the inside. He has had those documents for 4 years, Han Seo said finally. He was still facing the window. Why didn't he use them? Because he did not need to. Until now. A pause. Until I got close enough to his acquisition structure that using them became more valuable than holding them. She let that settle. And why did he tell me? Han Seo turned from the window. His expression had reorganized itself into something controlled and precise again. But underneath it, just for a moment, she had seen what was actually there. Because he saw me watching you last night. Silence. He wanted you to know what you were standing next to. He had told Yoon through his body language, through 6 months of careful returns to the same restaurant, that Zara meant something to him. And Yoon, who collected leverage the way other men collected art, had filed that information away and waited. Last night had been the activation. The slap had simply accelerated the timeline. That right there, what Yoon did, using a person as a message, that is the specific kind of cruelty that makes your blood go cold. If you felt it, you already understand why what happens next had to happen.
Stay with me.
Director Yoon did not get angry about the slap. That was the most frightening thing about it. His PA reported later that he had returned from the dinner, poured himself a single glass of whiskey, sat down at his desk, and made 3 phone calls. 30 minutes total. Calm, precise, thorough. The first call was to the manager of Gilt, who had Zara's box waiting at the staff entrance by 6 the following morning. The second call was to a contact at the Immigration Services liaison office. Nothing was filed yet, just a conversation, a relationship maintenance exercise, the kind that reminds people of the shape of the favors they owe. The third call was to Mr. Bay. Zara did not know about Mr. Bay yet. She found out the way you find out about things like that. A reflection in a shop window. A figure that appears twice on a street where coincidence has already been spent. She had been walking back from a convenience store 2 days after the dinner when she saw him.
Broad. Still.
Looking at her building the way someone looks at a building when they are memorizing the entrance points. She walked past her own door, kept moving, circled the block, went in through the service entrance at the back. She called the number Hannah had given her. 1 ring. He is already outside your building, Hannah said before Zara could speak. How do you know that? Because we have been watching him watch you since yesterday morning.
A pause.
You need to not go back there tonight. My apartment. Yes. The word landed with the full weight of what it meant. Everything she had. Her documents. Her laptop. The photograph of her mother. The carefully assembled evidence of 3 years of surviving. Where do I go? Hannah told her. The apartment was clean and anonymous and clearly maintained for exactly this kind of purpose. Hannah had food ready. She did not make it feel like charity. She set a bowl in front of Zara with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who understood that dignity sometimes looks like not making a thing of something. Zara ate. She had not eaten in almost a day. Then she looked up and said what she had been holding since the meeting room. He came back 6 times. To Gilt.
6 times.
Does he do that for everyone in his case files? Hannah looked at her for a moment. No, she said simply. He does not. It happened on a Thursday. Zara was at the safe house. She had been there for 3 days, working through the documents Han Seo had given her, cross-referencing names and dates and the particular architecture of a financial structure built to be invisible. She was good at this, better than anyone had given her credit for, because linguistics is fundamentally the study of how meaning is constructed and concealed, and that is exactly what financial fraud is. She had found two things that the file had not flagged. She was about to call Hannah when her phone lit up with a news alert. She read it twice. Then she read it a third time because the first two times her brain had refused to fully process what it was saying. The documents had surfaced on a financial crimes reporting platform at 11 the previous night. Anonymous submission, the forged signatures, the clinic payments, the money laundering structure, all of it attached to Han Seo's name. The financial press had picked it up by 6 in the morning. By 9, there were cameras outside Seo Capital. By 11, 3 board members had called emergency meetings. By the time Zara read the alert, Han Seo had already walked into his building past 40 press cameras without breaking stride, which was either the bravest thing she had ever seen or the most disciplined, or both. She called Hannah. "I know," Hannah said immediately. "The two things I found in the file. There is a timestamp inconsistency on the clinic authorization documents. And there is a secondary signatory whose name appears on the forged instruments who was documented to be outside the country on the date of signing." A pause. "Say that again." Zara said it again. "Slowly." "Zara." Hannah's voice had shifted. "I need you to write all of that down exactly as you just said it and send it to me in the next 10 minutes. What happens in 10 minutes? Han Seo is in a meeting with his legal team right now. What you just found could change the entire shape of his defense." She wrote it down.
Senate.
Then sat back and stared at the ceiling and thought about the strange geometry of a situation where a waitress who had been fired for a slap was now potentially holding the evidence that could save the man she had slapped for. This is the moment I need you to subscribe if you haven't already. Because what Zara found in that file, it was not luck. It was the exact skill that Director Yoon had spent 3 years trying to make sure she would never get to use. The story does not end here.
Stay.
She should not have gone outside. She knew that afterward. In the clean certainty of retrospect, it was obvious. But the safe house had walls, and she had been inside them for 4 days, and she had needed air and 20 minutes and the particular reset that comes from standing in a city that does not know your name. Mr. Bay found her 3 blocks from the safe house. He did not touch her. He did not need to. He simply appeared in front of her on the pavement with a black car behind him and said that Director Yoon would like to speak with her and that it was not a request, but that it was being offered as one as a courtesy. She got in the car. This time, she was not choosing. She was calculating. Because getting in the car meant she would hear what Yoon wanted her to hear, and if she already knew what she knew, that was an advantage, not a vulnerability. Yoon's office was exactly what she expected. Every object in it had been chosen to communicate scale.
The desk.
The awards. The framed photographs with important people. She had served enough powerful men to know that the ones who needed this much furniture to establish dominance were not the ones you feared for their power. You feared them for what they would do to protect the appearance of it. He offered her tea. She declined. He told her, pleasantly, that the documents now circulating in the press were just the beginning. That what had not yet been released was considerably more damaging. That a woman in her position, undocumented work history, a scholarship irregularity on her record, immigration complications, she would not want to be attached to someone whose name was about to become synonymous with financial crime. He was offering her a way out. All she had to do was confirm, on record, that she had heard Han Seo discuss the clinic payments at Gilt. A simple statement. A server overhearing a private conversation. It would take 5 minutes. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that made Director Yoon's pleasant expression flicker for the first time. She told him the name of the secondary signatory, the one who had been out of the country. She said it quietly and precisely, and watched his face as the information reached him. She told him about the timestamp, the specific discrepancy, the document number. His expression did not collapse. Men like Yoon do not collapse. But something behind his eyes went very still in a way that she recognized as the specific stillness of a person recalculating. She stood up. "I think we are done here," she said. Before she walked out of that office, before I tell you what happened in the next 48 hours, I need you to predict something. Does Zara make it out of that building? Or does Yoon have something she has not counted on? Tell me your prediction in the comments right now, because the answer is going to surprise you. She should have known he would not just let her walk out. Mr. Bae was at the lobby exit before she reached it. Two men flanking him outside the glass. Not aggressive, just present in the specific way that removes options. She turned. The elevator bank behind her. A security desk to the right staffed by a guard who was looking at the desk and nodded her in the deliberate way of someone who had been instructed to look at the desk. She had her phone. She had what she knew. She had no exit. She sent Hannah one word: building. Then she put her phone in her coat pocket and turned back toward the lobby and thought very carefully about what she had. She had one asset that Yoon had not accounted for. He thought she was alone. He thought she had come to him because she was cornered and that the information she had deployed was a bluff, a last piece of leverage from a woman with no real infrastructure behind her. He did not know about the second thing she had sent Hannah, not just the document analysis, the full file cross-reference, sent to a secured server 3 days ago, time-stamped, encrypted, with a delivery instruction that would trigger automatically if she did not cancel it within 72 hours. 72 hours from the time she had sent it. She checked her watch. 14 hours left. She had 14 hours to either get out of this building or let the automatic delivery run. The delivery was addressed to the Financial Crimes Unit of the Seoul Prosecutor's Office. She looked at Mr. Bae through the glass. She walked back toward the elevator. She opened Yoon's office door without knocking. He was still at his desk. He looked up. The recalculation was still happening behind his eyes. She could see it, but it had not resolved yet. She sat down. She had not been invited to sit.
She did it anyway.
Then she told him about the 72 hours, about the server, about the prosecutor's office. Not as a threat. She said it the way you describe a weather system. Something that is coming regardless. The only thing that changes, she said, is whether you are the subject of that file or the person who cooperated with the investigation. He looked at her for a very long time. Director Yoon had spent his career reading people, finding the seam between what someone said and what they actually had. He was looking for that seam right now. He could not find it because there was no seam. She was telling him the exact truth. For exactly 36 hours, it looked like it was going to be all right. The timestamp discrepancy Zara had found was independently verified by Han Seo's legal team within hours. The secondary signatories' travel records were confirmed and attached to the document analysis. The file reached the prosecutor's office not through Zara's automated delivery, which she canceled with 4 hours to spare, but through a formal submission by Han Seo's legal counsel. Director Yoon went quiet. The kind of quiet that in Seoul's financial world means a man is managing something privately. The press coverage shifted. Not entirely, not cleanly, but the framing began to change. Han Seo called her. Not through Hannah.
Directly. He said thank you.
She said he did not need to thank her. He said that what she had found in that file was not something his team had seen in 8 months of review. She said that his team had been looking for financial irregularities and she had been looking at the language of the documents, which is a different lens. He asked if she was all right. She said yes, and meant about 60% of it. He said she could stay in the safe house as long as she needed. She said she would be fine. He said her name again, the same way as before. Quiet and certain. Zara. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Good night, Han Seo. She ended the call and sat in the quiet for a long time. It was not over. She knew it was not over. Men like Yoon do not go quiet because they have accepted something. They go quiet because they are rebuilding. But for one night, in a small borrowed apartment with the Seoul skyline in the window, she let herself breathe. The knock came at 6:40 in the morning. Two immigration compliance officers. Polite, professional, thorough. There had been a report filed, an anonymous report citing irregular work documentation and employment outside the terms of her original visa classification. The scholarship visa that had technically lapsed 3 years ago and had been operating in a gray area since. Yoon's second call. The one she had almost forgotten. She had 48 hours to present documentation at the Immigration Compliance Office or face a removal order. 48 hours. She sat on the edge of the bed for a while, not panicking. She did not panic, but the particular weight of it, 3 years of careful construction, the job, the apartment, the invisible life she had built, all of it being dismantled from a direction she had not fully shielded. That weight was real, and she sat with it. Then she called Hannah. Hannah answered before the first ring completed. "I know," she said. "He planned this separately from the documents," Zara said. This was always the backup. Yes. "How long have you known about the immigration contact?" A pause. "Not long."
But there.
30 minutes longer than you." Zara understood the pause. Hannah had been trying to find a solution before she had to deliver the problem. She did not hold it against her. What are the options? Han Seo is already on a call with his legal team. There is a pathway through an employment sponsorship reclassification, but it requires documentation that takes time we may not have. 48 hours. Yes. What does Han Seo say? Another pause. Longer. He says he will fix it. A beat. He also says you should know that he is going to fix it not because of the file or the evidence or any strategic reason. Zara closed her eyes. He said to tell you exactly that. What Han Seo did next was not in any plan. Hannah did not know he was going to do it. His legal team did not know. Zara certainly did not know. He walked into the Seoul prosecutor's office alone at 8:40 in the morning and requested a meeting with the lead investigator on the Yoon financial case. He got one. In that meeting, he placed on the table not just the forged document evidence. He placed something else. Something he had been protecting for 4 years. Financial records from his mother's clinic treatment, the real ones, showing the actual payment source, his own personal account, exhausted and rebuilt twice over, the specific record of a son who had paid for his mother's treatment himself and had the debt and the recovery documented in full. He gave them everything, including, attached to the back of the submission, a formal request for the immigration compliance case against Zara Addo to be reviewed in the context of the Yoon investigation, given that her presence in Seoul and her employment history were directly entangled with a scheme that had deliberately targeted her. Zara found out from the news, not from Han Seo, not from Hannah. A financial journalist had been outside the prosecutor's office and had photographed him entering. By midday, the photograph was everywhere. CEO of Seo Capital, walking into a prosecutor's office, alone, carrying documents, without lawyers. The caption read, "Source or suspect?" She stared at the photograph for a long time. The man in the photograph was not protecting himself. The lawyers protect you. Walking in alone with documents means you have decided that the truth is more important than the protection. She understood then what kind of man he actually was. Not the boardroom version. Not the controlled gaze across the table version. The actual version. The one who had gone back to Gilt 6 times not because of a case file, but because somewhere in those 6 visits he had seen her, the real her underneath the performance, and had not been able to walk away from what he saw. She also understood something about herself. That she had known that for a while. She had just been protecting herself from knowing it. Director Yoon was formally called for questioning that afternoon. The immigration compliance case against Zara was suspended pending review within 24 hours of Han Seo's submission. Mr. Bae disappeared from her street. Quietly. Efficiently. The way enforcement disappears when the person giving the instructions is suddenly occupied with their own problems. 3 days later, the Financial Crimes Unit announced a formal investigation into Director Yoon's acquisition structure. It was not over. Investigations take time. Yoon had lawyers and resources and the deep institutional patience of someone who had been playing this game since before Han Seo had his first office. But the shape of things had changed. 2 weeks later, she met him at a small cafe near Gyeongbokgung. Not his office, not a safe house, not a room designed for crisis management, just a place with good coffee and afternoon light, and no one who knew either of them.
He was already there when she arrived.
Not in a suit, dark sweater, jeans. He looked, she thought, like a person rather than a position for the first time since she had met him. She sat down. He had already ordered her coffee. She did not ask how he knew how she took it. She suspected he had asked Hannah. She suspected Hannah had told him with the same quiet satisfaction of someone who has been watching two people be ridiculous at each other for months. Your employment sponsorship came through, he said. I know. Hannah told me. Are you going to use it? She looked at him.
You know what I studied, she said.
Back in Ghana. Linguistics. International communications. There is an open position at a cultural policy nonprofit I have been looking at. They do work between African institutions and East Asian universities. Language access programs. He was quiet for a moment. Then something happened on his face that she had now seen twice. The real smile. Small and private and completely unguarded. That sounds like something you would be very good at. It is something I will be extraordinary at, she said. And for the first time in 3 years, she said it without checking herself afterward. If you have ever had to get very quiet about who you were just to survive somewhere, and then had to remember how to be loud again, share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Because what Zara carried into that room and what she walked out with are not the same thing. Han Seo walked her to the corner afterward. At the corner he stopped. She stopped. He said her name, the same way he always said it, like it was a fact that had been true before he said it. Zara. She looked at him. The next time I come into a room you are in, he said, I would like to come as someone you already know. She considered him for a moment. This careful, controlled, unexpectedly honest man who had walked into a prosecutor's office alone and carried 4 years of private grief onto a government desk because the truth mattered more than the protection. You already are, she said. She walked away first. He stood at the corner and watched her go. And for the first time in 12 years of building walls around himself, Han Seo did not move to repair the one she had just walked through. But here is what nobody knew yet. 3 days after the formal investigation was announced, Director Yoon had a private dinner. Not at Gilt. Somewhere with no reservations and no record. The person across from him was not one of his known associates. Not a lawyer. Not a board contact. What passed between them at that table has not been confirmed. What we know is what Mr. Bae reported afterward, because Mr. Bae, as it turned out, had been keeping notes. Not for Yoon, for someone else entirely. And what those notes contained about the connection between Director Yoon, the person across from him at that private dinner, and the scholarship fund that had been used to remove Zara Addo from Seoul 3 years before she was ever supposed to become a problem, that is a story that is not finished. Not even close. If you want to know who was sitting across from Yoon at that table and why Mr. Bae kept those notes, and exactly how deep this goes, part 2 is coming. Subscribe right now so you do not miss it when it drops. Because what Zara and Han Seo do not know yet is the part that changes everything all over again.